if I'm going to try to make a closed cycle refrigerator, I'm going to need a cooling coil coming out of my compressor, and I'm going to use this brake line. I've got 25 feet of this galvanized steel brake line. I'm just going to try bending it into essentially a cooling coil here. It's not that easy to bend. Apparently there's really two kinds of brake line. One is cupro-nickel and the other is made of this steel. And I decided to use the steel for pressure, but it is kind of hard to bend. I've decided in my second shot at refrigeration with nitrous oxide that I'm going to do some wholesale reworking. Brand new bottle, never used. Here's my first cooling coil for the compressed nitrous oxide coming out of the compressor. I could not make that one gas tight. I just had problems with the flares. So I made this one. It's also made out of brake line. It's the cupro-nickel stuff. I was a little concerned about whether or not it could stand the pressure. I've tested this to 1,000 psi, and it stands up just fine. So that'll be my cooling coming out of the compressor. So I've upgraded my chamber a bit. I put a 0.045 welding tip in there. The previous one was a 0.020, so it's twice as large. I've added a thermocouple with a little bit of JB weld so that I hopefully can measure the inside of the chamber rather than just the outside of the chamber and see if I can figure out why it's plugging up. I decided to go ahead and put a little radiator attached to the bottom of my chamber and transfer a little more heat out of it if I could. So I'm just going to get this thing all assembled and give it another go. I'll show you the rest of it shortly. Well, we're back again. We're going to try another experiment where I'm going to try to refrigerate with nitrous oxide and hopefully make dry ice. So let's run down my setup here. So this is my box. It's not the same box, it's a new one. It's fenestrated there with an inlet for CO2. There's my monitoring leads. That's my outlet from my cooling coil. Of course, here's my inlet from my tank. That's a new tank, and that has about 375 grams of nitrous oxide in it. I've done my best to seal this thing, and it'll hold about 5 centimeters of water pressure, but then it starts leaking. This right here is just some kale wool that I put above the chamber, and I've got my temperature monitors. This is the one that goes into the chamber, and devastatingly, it is not working. I wish I'd checked it before I buttoned the thing up. Pressure gauge. So the outlet comes down here across and into my manifold that I had before, which I then fill a balloon with. I pump out of the manifold, and this is my new thing. This is my cooling coil to take the gas out of the pump, cool it off because it's going to be about 40 C when it comes out, and then I'm going to put it back into the tank. Now, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that I don't want to cool the gas off too much. I want the water to be warmer than the tank. Right now the water is 24.4, and the tank is 23.3, because that tank's got liquid nitrous oxide in it, and if I cool the gas off too much in the water, it's going to be under the same pressure as the tank, and it will liquefy in the coil, and I don't know if this inlet valve will allow liquid CO2 to flow into the tank. It's made for gas. So that's one thing I'm not going to do. Is I'm going to try to keep from making liquid nitrous oxide there in the coil. So let's go ahead and get things ready to go. Here are my emergency repair tools. Here is my control panel of all of my different temperatures. I've got the bottom of the chamber, the middle of the coil exhaust, the box, the tank, the valve body, and then I've also got the output from the compressor and the input to the tank. So I can keep an eye on those temperatures. A couple of other style points. Much like that hand pump, I made a little block of plexiglass that I glued over the outlet of this pressure relief valve, so that brings it back into the nitrous oxide collection line, so that I hopefully can stop some of my nitrous oxide loss. Okay, other than that, I think I've got to cool off my cooling water. I think my pump is pumping. I'll set up my overall camera system and we'll try this. Oh, and what would be a good day without a bag of CO2, so that I can again try to make dry ice. All right, let's get this party started. Now remember what I want to do. Is I want to get the chamber to cool off, and I want to drive that down into the mid coil. I might even go to get the coil exhaust cold, because I want to make a lot of cold in this chamber. There goes the chamber bottom down to 9 degrees. That was quick. Obviously I want to get a lot colder than that. I've pressure tested this cooling coil here up to about 1,000 psi. So let's try this and see if I can put this gas back into the bottle. The valve body's down to -50 already. So you can see we're starting to make some real progress here. The coldest I've seen, I think, is -80. We are leaking a little gas, but it's cold in there. And I am running CO2 in, so I have hope. I'm going to have to call this a day, because my pump's getting really hot. It's up around 57 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I got really cold. I got as low as -80. So I'm hoping that I'm going to find something white and delicious inside. Okay, open sesame. In the bottom of the box, my friends, dry ice. This is not dry ice, but that is. That is dry ice. Look, I thought it was pieces of styrofoam, but it's not. It's clearly dry ice. There it goes. Okay, so nice proof of concept. I made dry ice by refrigeration. This is a 20-minute run that I did in this particular experiment. As usual, the first thing that cools off is the body of the valve. You can see it started off in the 20s, and it kind of went down there into the -40s and 50s, and it kind of just stayed where it should be. That's a fairly common pattern that I've observed before. Generally speaking, the chamber body is the next thing that cools off, as you see here. And it also came down sort of into the -40s, stayed down between the -40s and the -60s during the course of the run. Fairly stable, not uncommon. Copper's got a fairly high specific heat, so it tends to stay a fairly good temperature. This is the middle of the coil. You can see that it was third to drop. That's not unusual either. As the gas comes out of the chamber, it starts to run through the coil. And it's a little less dependent on flow than the next graph that you'll see in a second. And it looks like it stayed probably in the low to mid -70s through most of the end of the run. This is the end of the coil. I always have a problem with this because it's very dependent on the flow up and down. When I start spilling liquid nitrous oxide out of the end of the coil, it has a tendency to seesaw down. So those sharp drops are due to higher flow rates, and as I turn the flow down, the temperature rises back up and gives you that sawtooth. This is the box, which is, as you can see, closely mirrors the behavior of the chamber and settled out in the -60s to -70 or so. My real problem, though, is that I was shooting for -55 because that's what I thought that CO2 would freeze at, but it actually freezes at -75 C way down there. So except in a couple instances, I really didn't get cold. So I think most of my freezing must have happened on the coil. Oh well, I don't know if I'm actually going to continue with this apparatus or not. I did my proof of concept. I managed to make dry ice through refrigeration, so I don't know that I really have anything else to prove with this particular device. And using my pump as a refrigeration pump really doesn't seem like the best possible use of a several $100 device. Anyway, and the other thing I would mention, by the way, is that I never got above about 800 psi through the coil here. So clearly either this valve will admit liquid nitrous oxide, or I managed to keep the temperatures in such a way that the nitrous oxide never liquefied in the coil. Either way, that seemed to have worked. So that's all I've got for this episode. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you want, or if you don't want, you don't have to. That's fine too. Tell your friends. If they don't want to watch, of course, I'm fine with that too. I'm just here doing my thing. Either way, thanks very much for watching, and have a great day.